Chapter 10. Making a Plan.
Madame Bonacieux,
said d'Artagnan, coming in through the door which Constance opened.
I must say that your uncle is a bad man of low honor.
Did you hear our conversation? Asked Constance.
Yes, every word.
But how?
By a secret method.
He answered.
But that is not important.
And what did you learn by what we said?
That the Queen needs a clever, brave, loyal man to take a letter to London for her. You may decide if I am clever, madam, but I can promise that I am brave and loyal to both the Queen and to you.
If you guessed all of this from our conversation, then you are indeed a clever man, said Constance, worried. But I fear my uncle has also guessed the same. He must have gone to tell Cardinal Richelieu of the Queen's plan. I trust you, d'Artagnan. Let me tell you the whole story. Constance then told d'Artagnan the terrible story of the Queen's diamond sash. When she finished, d'Artagnan stood up tall and said,
If I am captured while trying to deliver the letter,
he said,
I will die before I speak one word of what you have told me. I must go to London at once.
Then take this, said Constance, holding out the Queen's ring. It was the Queen's, and you can sell it for money to travel to England. She opened a box and took out the bag of gold that her uncle had shown her just a half-hour before. You should take this money also, she said.
The Cardinal's gold?
Said d'Artagnan, laughing.
It will be funny to save the Queen using the Cardinal's money.
Quiet, interrupted Constance, moving to the window. I hear someone talking in the street. It is my uncle's voice.
Quickly,
d'Artagnan cried, grasping her hand.
He must not see us.
They quickly moved to the back door, locked it, and walked up the stairs as silent as shadows. When they were safe in d'Artagnan's room, they went over to the window and looked out through a small space in the curtains. They could see her uncle talking with a tall man wearing a long cloak. A moment later, the tall man turned around, and they could see his face. D'Artagnan quickly jumped to his feet, pulled out his sword, and ran towards the door. The man in the cloak was the man of Meung. "What are you doing?" cried Constance.
I have promised to kill that man,
answered d'Artagnan. "D'Artagnan, wait! Your life now belongs to the Queen," she whispered with great strength in her voice. "In the Queen's name, I order you not to put yourself into any danger. Listen, they are talking about me." D'Artagnan put back his sword and slowly moved back to the window. Bonacieux had opened his door and went inside. He returned a moment later and told the man wearing the cloak that his niece had left.
Do you think,
said the man,
that your niece knew your reason for going out? I tricked her,
said Bonacieux happily.
She could not have known. Is the young musketeer at home? No, I have not heard any sound coming from his room in many days. Let's go into your house. Nobody can see us there.
Oh, no, said Constance. We will not be able to hear them any more.
Yes, we will, madam,
d'Artagnan said.
We will be able to hear them quite well.
He raised a piece of wood floor in the center of the room, sat down on his knees, and whispered to Constance to join him. When she sat down, she could hear voices from her uncle's house below.
So, you believe that your niece has gone back to the palace without speaking to anyone but you?
Said the stranger.
I am quite sure of it. It is important that she has not spoken to anyone, you understand? Then the news I told you is useful. Yes, quite valuable, my friend Mr. Bonacieux. The Cardinal is very pleased with you. Now, tell me, did your niece say any names? No, she only said that she needed me to go to London to help a very famous person. You were foolish not to pretend that you were willing to help her. If you had, then, we would now have the letter, which might tell us some very important information. There is still time,
said Bonacieux.
I will go find my niece and tell her that I have thought more about the matter and am willing to help. As soon as she gives me the letter, I will bring it to the Cardinal. Good. Go quickly. I will go prepare all our soldiers so that they can guard the roads going to the coast. It is possible that your niece has already found someone to take the letter to England.
The stranger then left. My uncle is now one of our enemies, whispered Constance angrily. A terrible scream came from below. Mr. Bonacieux had discovered that his bag of gold was gone and was crying.
Thieves! Thieves!
A minute later, he ran out of the house. We must go at once, said Constance. Be brave, my friend, and be careful. Remember that you now serve the Queen.
I serve the Queen, and you also,
said d'Artagnan.
I will work for her loyally and try to win her praise. But shall I also work loyally for you and win your love?
Constance stood up and left the room. Her only answer was a beautiful smile on her face. A few minutes later, d'Artagnan also left the room and went to see a gold maker who he knew. He sold the Queen's ring for 2,000 gold pieces. He then went to see Mr. Treville, and he told him everything.
I hope,
d'Artagnan finished saying,
that you can give me time away from musketeer service so that I may go to London immediately. Of course, you may go,
Mr. Treville began.
But if you go alone, you will be killed before you reach the coast. For this adventure, 4 good friends must go together so that one may arrive safely. Aramis, Athos, and Porthos shall join you. And you should also take your servants if they know how to use swords and guns.
The young musketeer's face filled with excitement.
Thank you, sir,
he cried. D'Artagnan went quickly to Athos' house, where he found his 3 friends talking together.
Friends,
said d'Artagnan,
we must go to London. London?
cried Porthos.
What must we do there? I cannot tell you, gentlemen, but you must trust me. Mr. Treville has let us go, and we serve the Queen. To get to London,
Porthos said unhappily,
we will need money, and I have none.
D'Artagnan threw 2 bags of gold on the table.
I have money, friends,
he said.
There is far more in that bag than we shall need. We will all share it. But I fear that we will not all arrive in London. It is very likely that some of us will be killed on the way. The Cardinal will use all his power to stop us from reaching the coast. I must tell you now that this is going to be an extremely dangerous journey. Could we possibly want anything more than to fight the Cardinal?
said Athos.
D'Artagnan, I will follow you. I shall also,
said Aramis.
You are my friend,
said Porthos.
I will join. When must we go?
asked Athos.
At once,
answered d'Artagnan.
Our plan is simple. We will take our servants, for they are all good, strong men, and will help us in a fight. I will carry the Queen's letter here in my pocket. If I am killed, one of you must take the letter and go on. If he is killed also, then another man must carry it, and so on. If only one of us arrives in London, it will be enough to help the Queen. Friends, is it agreed? It is agreed!
shouted the 3 Musketeers. Chapter 11. Rush to the Coast. That same night, 8 men left Paris in the middle of the night. Athos, Porthos, Aramis, d'Artagnan, and their 4 servants. Each man carried a sword, knives, and they even had a few handguns. They traveled easily through the night and did not have any trouble until they reached Chantilly in the early morning. They were hungry for breakfast and went to an inn. They entered the eating hall and had a large breakfast. When they finished eating, the men stood up.
"Wait, my friends,"
a stranger yelled as they stood up.
"Before you leave, join me in a drink to the great Cardinal Richelieu." "Certainly,"
Porthos replied.
"if you will also drink to the king's health with me."
The stranger jumped to his feet and stared at Porthos.
"I do not know any king but the great cardinal,"
he cried.
"Then you must either be drunk or a fool,"
Porthos replied. The stranger reached for his sword.
"You cannot stop this fight now,"
Athos said to Porthos.
"We will leave your servant and horse here. Quickly, kill this man and then follow after us."
The 3 men went outside and jumped on their horses. They heard the sound of steel hitting against steel through a window of the inn. They then rode fast along the road. Many miles ahead, the road became narrow between 2 high hills. In front of them, they saw about 10 men fixing the road. As they reached the men, Aramis stopped and asked one of the men where they were. Suddenly, one man yelled loudly, and all the men ran and jumped into a large hole on one side of the road, from which each man lifted a hidden gun.
"It's a surprise attack,"
d'Artagnan shouted.
Ride fast."
As the men rode down the road, bullets flew all around them. One bullet came so close that it shot d'Artagnan's hat off his head. Then he heard Aramis cry out loudly. A bullet had gone into his arm, but he grasped his horse hard and kept moving as fast as the others. A mile later, they all stopped and did all they could to stop the blood flowing from Aramis' wound. They then rode on as fast as they could for 3 more hours. By this time, Aramis' face had become very pale. They found an inn and left Aramis there with his servant. Athos, d'Artagnan, and their 2 servants rode on, not reaching another town until after midnight, and slept in an inn. The inn owner only had 2 rooms left, and each was at opposite sides of the inn. Athos and d'Artagnan knew that it would be safer if they stayed close together, so they decided to sleep in the common hall. D'Artagnan's servant, Planchet, slept next to the door to guard them through the night. Athos' servant, Grimaud, slept outside near the horses with orders to have them ready at 5 in the morning. Just before 5, they heard a terrible scream and the sounds of fighting near the horses. They ran outside and found Grimaud lying almost dead on the ground. He had been beaten with sticks. The horses were all gone. Athos and d'Artagnan now were certain that the Cardinal had planned against them. 2 fresh and strong horses were standing ready by the door of the inn. Their owners had slept in the inn that night and were paying their bill. Athos went inside to pay their bill also, while d'Artagnan and Planchet waited outside. The inn owner looked at the coins that Athos gave him and then cried out that they were false and he would have Athos arrested.
"You lie,"
said Athos, stepping towards him with anger in his eyes. At that moment, 4 men carrying guns and swords entered through a side door and attacked Athos.
"D'Artagnan,"
he yelled loudly.
"I am attacked! Run quickly!"
He then fired 2 gunshots. D'Artagnan and Planchet knew they had no time to lose. They jumped onto the 2 horses by the door and rode off at top speed. After a short while, D'Artagnan slowed down his horse.
Could you see inside? What happened to Athos?
D'Artagnan asked.
Mr. D'Artagnan,
said Planchet.
I saw a man fall from each of his 2 gunshots, and when we rode off, I could see that he was using his sword to fight the other 2. Brave and strong Athos,
said D'Artagnan quietly to himself.
It was hard for me to leave him there, but we must reach our goal. Now, let us ride.
The 2 men were now close to the coast. They rode fast on the last part of their journey to the coast. When they were only 300 steps from the doors of the port, D'Artagnan's horse fell down and was too tired to stand up again. Planchet's horse was tired also, and would not leave the other horse. They got off the horses and ran towards the port. In front of them, they saw a rich gentleman and his servant talking to a ship captain. D'Artagnan listened to their conversation.
I need to go to England immediately. Can you take me? I could take you easily, sir,
replied the ship captain.
But this morning, Cardinal Richelieu made the order that no people could cross without a letter from the Cardinal. I have that letter,
said the gentleman, pulling out a piece of paper from his pocket.
Here it is. You must first have it examined by the port official,
said the captain.
And then I will be happy to take you. Very well,
said the gentleman.
I will be back soon. Please, prepare your ship.
The gentleman and his servant started walking to see the port official. D'Artagnan and Planchet followed them closely. Once outside the gates to the port, D'Artagnan ran in front of the gentleman and turned around.
Sir,
D'Artagnan said coolly,
I need that letter you have in your pocket, and I am going to take it from you. Are you crazy?
asked the man.
Let me pass at once. You will not pass. Foolish young man, I will have to shoot out your brains. Servant, give me my pistol. Planchet,
yelled D'Artagnan.
You stop the servant. I'll get the master.
With a quick movement, Planchet threw the servant down to the ground and had a knife at his neck. The gentleman pulled out his sword and jumped at D'Artagnan, only to learn that this man from Gascony was much better with a sword than he was. Within a minute, D'Artagnan had hit the sword out of his hand. D'Artagnan hit the gentleman in the head with the handle of his sword, and the man fell down like a stone. D'Artagnan took the cardinal's letter from his pocket. The name on the letter was the Comte de Ward. Planchet and D'Artagnan then pulled the 2 men into the forest and tied them to a tree.
And now,
D'Artagnan said, fixing his hair,
let's go and see the port official.
He introduced himself as the Comte de Ward to the port official.
Do you have a letter from the Cardinal?
The port official asked.
Yes, here it is. Very good,
said the port official.
We need these letters now because the Cardinal is trying to stop someone from crossing to England. Yes,
answered D'Artagnan.
It is a man called D'Artagnan. He must be stopped at all costs. Do you know him? What does he look like?
The port official asked excitedly.
Yes, I could describe him well,
said D'Artagnan, and gave the port official a description of the real Comte de Ward.
Is he with anyone?
asked the port official.
He is probably with his servant. We will look for them.
An hour later, D'Artagnan and Planchet were already on a ship to England. At 10 o'clock the next morning, the ship arrived in the harbor of Dover. Just a few hours after that, D'Artagnan and Planchet rode into the streets of London. Chapter 12. London. D'Artagnan had never been to London before. In fact, he only spoke a little bit of English. To find his way around, he simply wrote the name Buckingham down on a piece of paper. Everyone he showed the paper to pointed him the way to the Duke's grand house. When d'Artagnan arrived, he told the Buckingham servant that he had come all the way from Paris on a matter of life and death, and that he needed to see the Duke immediately.
"And who are you?"
the servant asked.
"Just tell the Duke that I am the young man who wanted to fight with him in Paris,"
D'Artagnan replied. The servant stared at D'Artagnan in surprise, but went to find the Duke anyway. Just a few minutes later, Buckingham had come to greet D'Artagnan.
"Is everything all right with the Queen?"
he asked, showing great worry in his voice.
"I think she is having some kind of trouble, sir,"
answered D'Artagnan.
"I have brought you this letter from her."
Buckingham reached for the letter with nervous fingers and opened it with fear on his face. He became pale white as he read. He then ordered his servant to get the wooden box that the Queen had given him. He then opened it and pulled out the blue sash covered with diamonds.
"The Queen gave this to me, but now the Queen needs them back again,"
he said, looking sad.
"And so they must be brought to her at once."
His sad eyes stared carefully at the beautiful sash. Suddenly he cried out,
"All is lost."
He then became even paler.
"There should be 12 diamonds. Now there are only 10. 2 diamonds are missing. Can they just be lost, or do you think they have been stolen?" "Certainly, stolen, I am sure,"
the Duke said angrily.
"Look, the sash has been cut. The Cardinal must have done this somehow. Let me think. I have only worn these diamonds one time. It was at a party in the palace about 8 days ago. Who was there that could have done this? Yes, I remember. It must have been the Countess of Winter." "Who is the Countess of Winter?"
D'Artagnan asked.
"She is a woman hiding many secrets, and I believe that she works for the Cardinal. She was born in France, but she married a powerful British man about 5 years ago. 2 years ago, he died, and I remember at that time many people said that she had killed her own husband." "What does the Countess of Winter look like?"
asked D'Artagnan. The Duke described her beautiful face, lovely skin, and terrible heart. D'Artagnan thought for a minute and remembered the woman's face he had seen in the carriage in Meung.
"Milady,"
he whispered quietly to himself, and then said aloud,
"Does the Cardinal have helpers and spies everywhere?" "Yes, many,"
replied Buckingham.
"He is a powerful and terrible man to have as an enemy. But perhaps we can beat him. When is the Queen's party going to happen?" "Next Monday." "Monday? We still have 5 days. Perhaps we still have enough time. Patrick!"
cried the Duke loudly. The servant entered the room.
"Patrick, go get my jeweler and my secretary,"
ordered Buckingham. The secretary arrived quickly. Buckingham was already sitting at his table, writing orders.
"Mr. Jackson,"
the Duke began, handing the man some papers,
"go immediately to see the Lord Chancellor and explain to him that all these orders must be done at once."
The secretary bowed deeply and left.
"I have ordered that no ships may leave England without my written permission,"
Buckingham said, turning to D'Artagnan.
"If the diamonds have not yet left for Paris, they will not get there until after you."
A minute later, the jeweler arrived.
"Mr. O'Reilly,"
began the Duke,
"look at the diamonds on this sash, and tell me how long it will take to make 2 more exactly the same as them. I can do it in 8 days, my lord. I will pay you 3,000 gold pieces if you can make them in 3 days. My lord, it will be done. I will begin at once.
The jeweler left quickly to begin working.
There is only one more thing left to do,
said Buckingham, turning to look at d'Artagnan.
Brave sir, how can I thank you? What do you desire? A bed, my lord.
D'Artagnan replied quickly. Buckingham laughed and ordered his servant to prepare him a room next to his own. D'Artagnan slept for many hours. 2 days later, the jeweler returned with the diamond earrings. They were copied so perfectly that neither Buckingham nor d'Artagnan could see any difference between the new diamonds and the old ones.
Here,
he said to d'Artagnan,
are the diamonds you came to get. Please tell the Queen that I have kept the wooden box, since it is the only thing of hers that she has left to me. And now, please tell me how I may repay you. I am the loyal servant of the Queen. I need no pay. Very well spoken,
Buckingham said.
Now, here is what you must do. I have prepared a ship for you. It will take you directly to the town of St. Valery on the French coast. Go to the town's only inn and ask to see the inn owner. Tell him the secret word, forward, and he will give you a fresh horse and directions to the next town and inn. When you reach the next inn, say the secret word again, and he will give you a fresh horse and more directions, and so on. On your journey to Paris, you will stop at 4 inns. Please tell each inn owner your address in Paris, and they will have the horses sent there. Please accept one of these horses as my gift of thanks, and to ask your 3 friends to take the others. That is, if your friends did not lose their lives helping the Queen. I pray that they have not. Thank you for your help, my lord,
said d'Artagnan with a bow.
Thank you, young man. It is a pleasure to meet a man with your courage.
D'Artagnan shook hands with the Duke, bowed, and left the house. He made his way to the river quickly. He found the ship that the Duke had prepared. He gave his letter of introduction to the captain, and they left for France immediately. Many ships were stopped in the port, waiting for the Duke's permission to leave. Passing by one ship, d'Artagnan saw the woman from the carriage in Meung, the woman called My Lady, also known as the Countess of Winter. She was walking anxiously up and down the floor of her ship. D'Artagnan tried to hide his face, but he had a feeling that she saw him too. My Lady did see him. She pretended not to notice him. But if d'Artagnan had seen the deep hatred in her eyes when she saw him, he would have known that he had a cruel and terrible enemy. He arrived in France and found the first inn. 12 hours later, he had already arrived in Paris. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he reached the Musketeers' camp. Mr. Treville told him that Athos, Porthos, and Aramis had all come back to Paris safely. D'Artagnan was more than happy to hear the news. Chapter 13. The Queen's Party. D'Artagnan arrived back on Sunday. The next day was the party. In addition to dancing, there was also going to be a performance of the king's favorite costume play, and the king and queen were going to be actors. The king looked tired and worried when he arrived at the party. The queen arrived about half an hour later, and looked even more worried than the king. The queen saw Cardinal Richelieu dressed in the costume of a Spanish soldier. He was watching the queen carefully with his sharp eyes. When he saw that the queen was not wearing her diamond sash, a horrible smile appeared on his lips.
I must tell the king this at once."
He whispered to himself and walked over to see him. The queen was walking around and talking with the guests. Suddenly the king, followed closely by the cardinal, rushed up to her.
"Madam, why aren't you wearing the diamond sash I gave you?"
he asked sharply. "I was worried that I might lose them at such a large party," the queen replied, a quite nervous voice.
"I am sure you will not, madam. What is the point of me giving you beautiful things if you are afraid to wear them?"
"I will have my servants go get them," the queen replied.
"Do so at once, madam,"
the king said coldly.
"for the costume play will begin very soon."
Both the king and the queen then went to their rooms to change for the play. The king came back first. He was dressed in the costume of a hunter. The cardinal handed the king a small box. The king opened it and saw 2 diamonds inside.
"What does this mean?"
the king asked in anger.
"Nothing, sire.
The cardinal replied softly.
Only if the queen is wearing her diamonds, count them. If you only find 10, ask the queen who could have stolen the 2 diamonds that are here."
The king stared at the cardinal and was about to question him, but before he could say anything, the whole hall became quiet, and all the guests spoke in whispers of great respect. The queen had entered the hall, dressed in the costume of a huntress. She was wearing the sash covered with diamonds over her shoulders. The king looked at her with great joy, and the cardinal stared at her with great anger, but they were both too far away to clearly count the diamonds. At that moment the costume play began, and lasted an hour. Just as the play ended, the king, followed by the cardinal, walked up to the queen.
"Madam, thank you for wearing your diamond sash,"
he said.
"But I believe 2 of them are missing, and I have brought them back to you."
He opened his hand and held out the 2 diamonds the cardinal had given him. The queen smiled and pretended to look happy and surprised. "My king is giving me 2 more diamonds," she said. "How wonderful! Now I shall have 14. The cardinal walked up next to the queen, while the king's eyes counted the diamonds on the sash. All 12 diamonds were still there. The king turned angrily to Cardinal Richelieu.
"What do you mean by this?"
he asked loudly. The cardinal's eyes became hot and angry, but he smiled with his lips.
"It means, sire,"
replied Richelieu,
"that I wish to give the queen 2 more diamonds, since this party is in her honor. Because I would not dare give them to her myself, I needed to use this method to persuade her to accept them."
The queen held out her hand to the cardinal and smiled. "Thank you, Cardinal Richelieu. I am sure these 2 diamonds must have cost you as much as all the others cost the king." Only one other person in the hall understood the queen's strange words and the angry look on the cardinal's face. It was d'Artagnan, who was standing back among the busy crowd, watching the conversation. A few minutes later, the queen left the hall. D'Artagnan was going to leave also, when he felt someone touch his shoulder. It was Constance. His heart jumped with excitement when she asked him to follow her. She led him into a small room and then left. The walls of the room were covered with cloth. D'Artagnan waited there for a few minutes quietly. Suddenly, he saw part of one of the walls open up like a door. He jumped up with shock. A hand and an arm came out through the small hole. The hand and arm were so white and lovely that D'Artagnan immediately knew that it was the queen herself. He fell down on one knee, took the hand carefully in his, and kissed it lightly. The hand then left just as quietly as it had come. Again, D'Artagnan was alone in the room. He looked down in his hand and saw that the Queen had left a beautiful ring in it. The Queen always thanked those loyal to her. D'Artagnan put the beautiful ring on his finger and sat there staring at it. A minute later, Constance Bonacieux returned.
"At last, it is you,"
D'Artagnan said excitedly. "Quiet," Constance whispered, putting up a finger to his lips. "Be silent and leave the way you came."
"But when will I see you again?"
"There will be a note at your house which will tell you everything. Now go, quickly." Before he could say anything else, she opened the door and pushed him out. He did not argue and obeyed her like a small child, which proved that D'Artagnan was really in love. Chapter 14. Capture. D'Artagnan did not reach home again until after 3 in the morning. Inside, on the table in his room, he found a letter from Constance. He opened it excitedly and read, "I must thank you for all your help, from myself and the Queen. Come to the pavilion behind the church this evening at about 10 o'clock. D'Artagnan's young heart filled with excitement. He walked around the room unable to sleep, but eventually he lay down and fell into sweet dreams. Later that morning, D'Artagnan went off to the Musketeers' station to see Mr. Tréville. The captain was in a good mood. He was pleased that the king and queen were so happy at the party, and was even more pleased that the cardinal looked so angry. When he saw D'Artagnan, his happy face changed.
"Sit down, my young friend,"
he said.
"We must talk about serious business. Your actions have saved the Queen and caused the Cardinal's plans to fail. You must be very careful now." "Why should I be careful? What do I have to fear?"
D'Artagnan asked with his head high.
"You have much to fear, young man, believe me. The Cardinal does not forget his enemies, and you are now one of his most troublesome enemies. I believe that the Cardinal will try to hurt you, and he may hurt you in some way that you do not expect." "The terrible devil!"
said D'Artagnan.
"What should I do?" "You must always be careful and see that there are many enemies all around you. You cannot trust anybody, not your friends, your family, or even your love. Do you have a love, D'Artagnan?"
D'Artagnan's face turned red. Tréville nodded his head in understanding.
"Be careful about your love. The Cardinal may try to hurt you through a woman,"
he said seriously.
"Be careful, young D'Artagnan. I say it again. You are the enemy of the most powerful man in France."
D'Artagnan left the Musketeers' station and went to see Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. He heard about each of their journeys, fights, and their return to Paris. At 9 o'clock that night, D'Artagnan left for the church and soon arrived in front of the pavilion. It was in the church garden in a quiet spot. D'Artagnan sat against a tree and waited. A few minutes later, the church bells rang 10 times. D'Artagnan did not move. He just watched the pavilion closely. All the pavilion's windows were closed except a small one on the first floor. The church clock hit 10:30. D'Artagnan felt his body become cold, but it was a warm night and he did not know why. He began walking up and down and became more and more worried about the quiet. Finally, 11 o'clock came, and D'Artagnan became very afraid that something terrible had happened to Constance. He decided to look into the pavilion. He climbed in through the window and walked up to the second floor. On the second floor, one of the windows was broken in, and the door was broken also. A table and many chairs were turned over, and D'Artagnan could tell that there had been a violent fight. D'Artagnan climbed back out of the window and ran quickly down to the street. His heart was moving fast, but his mind was clear. He saw things that he had not seen while coming to the church. The ground was covered with the footsteps of horses, and the wheels of a carriage had made small holes in the soft ground. A few minutes later, he was riding his horse fast towards Paris. It was not until 6 in the morning that d'Artagnan arrived back at his house. Mr. Bonacieux was waiting at his door.
"Hello, young man,"
he began.
"It seems that you have a very happy night. It is 6 in the morning, and you are just coming home, eh? What fun did you have last night? Just look at your shoes."
D'Artagnan looked down and saw that his boots were all covered with mud. He noticed that Bonacieux's shoes were also muddy. He suddenly realized that Bonacieux must have found a way to read the note that his niece had sent to d'Artagnan and had told the Cardinal. D'Artagnan wanted to pull his sword out right then and kill him, but he pretended to be happy and smiled.
"Last night I went to a party with many friends. A very merry one indeed,"
he said.
"I'll go and make Planchet clean my shoes. When he is finished, I will, if you wish, send him down to clean your shoes also."
D'Artagnan thought that Bonacieux might know where his niece was, and that he might be able to make him tell. He decided to first go and talk with his 3 friends and plan a way to rescue Constance. Chapter 15. The Rescue Plan. D'Artagnan and his friends sat discussing what they should do.
"We should have guessed that the Cardinal would do something like this,"
Athos said seriously. The others all agreed with him.
"We must rescue her.
D'Artagnan cried wildly.
We must act now. We cannot wait."
Athos placed a hand on D'Artagnan's shoulder.
"We will save her,"
he said quietly.
"But we must think clearly first. Our enemy is a very powerful man in France. We will need the help of powerful people." "The Queen will help,"
said Aramis suddenly.
"We must go to tell the Queen what has happened at once." "Yes,"
cried D'Artagnan, his eyes filling with the light of hope.
"But how can we get a message to her? I am familiar with a lady who is close to the Queen,"
said Aramis, looking quite embarrassed. D'Artagnan suddenly remembered his first meeting with Aramis and the lady's handkerchief that he was standing on. He also remembered that Constance had spoken once with a woman at a window of Aramis' house.
"Aramis's idea is good,"
said Athos.
"We should act at once. I hear that the King and Queen have been close recently. Perhaps she can persuade him to help us. Now, Aramis, tell us, how shall we send our message to the Queen, and how long will it take to reach her?"
Aramis looked over at the clock on the wall.
"Our message will be given to the Queen by mouth,"
he said,
"and will reach her ear within the hour."
D'Artagnan and his friends waited. Aramis promised D'Artagnan that the Queen would definitely help save Constance. But for 3 days there was no new news. During those 3 days and nights, D'Artagnan was very worried and could not think about anything except Constance. He practiced his sword skills and sat in his room waiting to hear some news. Finally, on the evening of the 3rd day, Aramis arrived with news.
"Madame Bonacieux is safe and well,"
he said.
"Tell me, where is she?"
cried D'Artagnan.
"She was put into the prison of Mons,"
Aramis answered.
"But the king has written an order which says that she is to be taken to a convent." "Which convent?"
D'Artagnan asked with great excitement in his voice.
"I still don't know. The Queen told me that the name must be kept secret until Constance is safe there. Once she is safe, we will be told, and we can then go there and take Madame Bonacieux away to some safe place." How long until she is there?
asked D'Artagnan.
Not long,
said Aramis, placing a hand on D'Artagnan's arm.
Do not worry, my friend.
The Musketeers waited 5 more days before news arrived. Aramis came over to D'Artagnan's room, holding a few pieces of paper in his hand.
Here is a letter from my cousin,
he said.
Inside is the information that you have been waiting to hear.
D'Artagnan quickly pulled the letter out of Aramis' hand and read, Dear cousin, you should go to Bethune. My sister has left our old servant in the convent there. Here is a letter from my sister to take the servant out of the convent. Goodbye, my dear cousin. Send news as soon as you are able. Marie Michon. The other piece of paper was an order. It said, October 12th, 1626. The convent of Bethune will let the person holding this letter take the girl who recently entered the convent. Anne.
Let us quickly go meet Athos and tell him what has happened,
said D'Artagnan.
I will tell Planchet to go find Porthos and tell him to come to join us as soon as he can.
Just a few minutes later, Planchet had gone, and the young Musketeers had left to find Athos. A few more minutes passed, and the door to D'Artagnan's room opened slowly and quietly. Mr. Bonacieux looked in without making a sound. When he saw that the room was empty, he came in and looked around. He saw the letter on the table and read it with great excitement. He was about to put it in his pocket, but then changed his mind.
I should not take it,
he said to himself,
or they might know that it was me who took it. However, the Cardinal will certainly be interested to learn of its contents. He will be very happy with me indeed.
Bonacieux then turned around and ran quickly down the stairs.
Mr. Bonacieux, my friend,
said the Cardinal,
you are a good man. Please, accept this bag of gold as thanks.
Bonacieux accepted the bag with large eyes, said his thanks, and bowed deeply. He then left the room. The Cardinal rang the bell sitting on his writing table. A moment later, an officer entered.
Bring Rochefort and Milady here immediately,
the Cardinal ordered. Just a minute later, the door opened, and the scarred Rochefort came in with the lovely Milady.
Milady and Rochefort,
began the Cardinal,
I need you both to leave Paris immediately on a mission of great importance. You both should remember a young servant girl of the Queen named Constance Bonacieux. I had her put in the prison in Mons, but now this young lady has been freed and moved by the Queen to a convent in Bethune. A young musketeer, her lover, is preparing to go to Bethune and to move Madame Bonacieux to some secret place. Aha!
Rochefort said with fire in his eyes.
I know which young man you mean.
I know also, cried my lady. Her eyes were angry as well. You mean the musketeer D'Artagnan, who caused me to fail you in the affair of the diamond earrings.
Listen to the plan,
said the Cardinal.
You, milady, will go to Bethune by carriage. Rochefort will be your guard. Rochefort must not enter the convent because Madame Bonacieux knows him. Milady, you will tell her that the Queen and her lover, D'Artagnan, sent you to take her to a place of safety. She has never seen you, and you should be able to trick her easily. I will write you a letter of order, but only use it if you truly need it.
The Cardinal sat down at his table and wrote a short letter. When we have the girl, what should we do then? My lady asked, as he finished writing. Where should we take her? The Cardinal thought for a moment and then wrote one word on the bottom of the letter.
It is written here,
he said. The Cardinal then wrote another letter and handed it to my lady.
Make her sign this letter. Let her know that she will stay guarded until she signs it. This letter will be very useful to me. Milady, use all your skills to persuade her to sign the letter.
My lady smiled terribly. Cardinal, she said with eyes hard as stone, I promise that I will not fail you again. Chapter 16. The Race to the Convent. D'Artagnan, the Musketeers, and their 4 servants prepared all night and left Paris at 5 the next morning. Their horses were from the Duke of Buckingham and were fast and strong. By early evening, they had travelled as far as Arras, where they stopped to eat and rest the horses. Just as they came close to the inn, a carriage rode away. D'Artagnan thought that he had seen the carriage before. Just then, a man came out of the inn and rode off on his horse. When D'Artagnan saw the man, he jumped back on his horse and yelled,
You will not escape me now.
Before he could ride away, Athos grasped his arm and asked,
Where are you going now, D'Artagnan? That was the man of Meung,
D'Artagnan cried.
I saw his face when the wind blew open his cloak. Quickly, gentlemen, we must follow him. My dear D'Artagnan,
said Aramis,
you must remember that his horse is fresh and ours are tired from a day of travel. We have no chance of following him.
Just then, the inn owner came running outside.
Mister,
he yelled after the man of Meung.
Mister, you dropped a piece of paper. Friend,
said D'Artagnan, turning quickly to the owner,
I will give you a piece of gold for that paper.
The host looked at him with large, happy eyes, and then said with a smile,
Of course. Here it is.
D'Artagnan opened the paper, read the words on it, and suddenly gave a shocked yell.
It is a death order signed by the Cardinal himself,
he said.
Friends, look at this.
The Musketeers came close to read the words.
October 13th, 1626. It is by my permission and for the good of France that the man holding this letter has killed who he has killed. Richelieu.
And then, written at the bottom of the paper, just one word, Armentières.
That must be his destination,
said Athos, putting a hand on D'Artagnan's shoulder.
And he is just on some business of the Cardinal's. Come, D'Artagnan, remember our business. Let us eat and rest, and then ride on to Bethune in a few hours.
Athos then walked into the inn, followed by Aramis and Porthos. D'Artagnan waited outside for a moment, looking down the road. He then made a decision, one that he would regret for the rest of his life. He turned around and followed his friend into the inn, and let the man of Meung ride on. In the middle of the night, Constance Bonacieux was awakened in her small room at the convent. "Wake up, my child. You must dress at once," said the head of the convent. "Someone has come from Paris to see you." Constance's eyes filled with excitement, and she sat up quickly. "Is it a young man?" she asked. The woman shook her head slowly. "No, a young lady," she answered. "A very lovely lady, the Countess de la Fère." The excitement left Constance's face. "I do not know her." Constance dressed and was then led into a room where a young woman sat at a table covered with food and wine. My lady stood up and raised her hands to Constance. "My dear lady, do you not know why I am here?" she asked softly. "How can I know? I know nothing." "Perhaps you know my husband, the musketeer called Athos," said my lady. "Yes," said Constance. "I have heard his name from D'Artagnan." "I have heard all your news, about how you were captured in the pavilion at the church," said my lady, "and about how the Queen rescued you from prison I have also been told, by the handsome d'Artagnan, who truly loves you with all his heart. Did he send you here to say that he will soon come? Constance asked hopefully. My lady shook her head sadly. No, he cannot, she said. Both d'Artagnan and my husband are watched day and night by the Cardinal's men. They did not dare to come here and lead the Cardinal to you. Because of this, they have sent me here to take you to a safe place. You are here alone? Asked Constance, looking shocked. Yes, my dear lady, and we leave here quickly. Many times while traveling here, I thought that someone was following my carriage. My lady sat down again and looked at Constance's face to see if she believed her. It seemed that Constance believed her. She did not think that a woman could be one of the Cardinal's spies. What must I do? Constance asked. You must come with me, replied my lady. My husband has a secret place where we can hide and wait for d'Artagnan. I understand. You are right, cried Constance. I will go and prepare. Suddenly, they heard the sound of horses running on the road outside. My lady ran over to the window and looked out into the night. Oh, my God, said Constance, afraid. Who is that outside? I may have been followed by the Cardinal's men, said my lady. Wait there. The horses came closer and stopped outside the convent. My lady looked out and saw 8 men on horses. She recognized one of them as d'Artagnan. It's the Cardinal's guards, she cried, turning to Constance. Quickly, we must run. Yes, we must go, said Constance, but she was too afraid to move. They then heard the horses stop under the window. Then came the sound of my lady's carriage, which rode off quickly. Then 4 gunshots were fired. Your carriage has gone, cried Constance. We can still escape safely, cried my lady. We can run across the garden. Hurry! We must go before they come inside. Constance was filled with fear. She walked a few steps and then fell down on her knees. My lady tried to carry her, but was not strong enough. Stand up, woman! We must run! She cried in anger. I can't, Constance said, crying loudly. I am too afraid. I cannot move. Leave me and escape yourself. I will not leave you here, cried my lady. She ran over to the table and poured a glass of wine. She then mixed some poison into the glass that she had hidden in her dress. My lady then gave the glass to Constance and said, Drink this wine quickly. It will give you strength. She put the glass up to Constance's lips and made her drink. This is not how I wished to take revenge, thought my lady, but I now have no other way. She put the glass down on the table and quickly ran out of the room. Constance tried to stand up, took a few steps, and fell back down into a chair, not able to move. There was a loud yell, and a moment later, the door to the room flew open. D'Artagnan and the 3 Musketeers rushed into the room. D'Artagnan threw down his sword and pistol and ran over to Constance. Athos, Porthos, and Aramis put their swords and pistols back into their belts and stood watching D'Artagnan. Constance's face was pale, and she looked at D'Artagnan like she was dreaming. You've come to save me, she said. She said you wouldn't.
Yes, yes,
D'Artagnan said softly.
We have come and all is well now.
She said you wouldn't come, repeated Constance weakly.
She? Who do you mean?
Asked D'Artagnan. Athos' wife. She heard your horses and thought you were the Cardinal's guards. She just ran away.
I still don't understand,
said D'Artagnan.
Who is this woman?
The woman whose carriage was outside at the door.
What is her name?
Cried D'Artagnan. can't remember. It is strange. My head hurts. Oh, my God, I cannot see."
"Her hands are as cold as ice,"
cried D'Artagnan.
"She is sick. Quickly, bring me water."
Aramis ran over to the table to get some water. He stopped when he saw Athos, who was standing near the table and looking sadly at the glass of wine. Athos walked over to Constance. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes.
"Dear madam,"
he said softly, holding up the glass of poisoned wine.
"Whose glass of wine is this?"
"It is mine, mister," replied the young woman.
"Who poured the wine in this glass?"
"She did, the Countess de la Fère." Athos stared at the wine-glass and made a terrible cry. Then he threw it down to the floor and said just one word.
"Poison!"
"D'Artagnan, I cannot see. Where are you?" cried Constance. "Do not leave me, D'Artagnan. I am dying." D'Artagnan quickly moved over to her side. Her face was pale, and sweat came down her head. Her breath was weak, and she could not speak. Suddenly, Constance lifted her arms and held D'Artagnan's head in her hands. Her eyes opened, and she looked at him for a moment, as if her whole soul had passed into his eyes, and gave one last breath. Chapter 17. The Man in Red. It was a sad night for D'Artagnan and the other musketeers. Eventually, each of them went to their room to try and sleep. Before going to bed, Athos gave orders to the 4 servants to leave at dawn and travel to Armentières, each by a different road. He asked Planchet to follow the road the carriage had gone. Early the next morning, D'Artagnan came to see Athos and asked what was to be done.
"We must wait,"
replied Athos. A few hours later, the woman of the convent told the musketeers that the funeral of Constance would happen at noon. At noon, the 4 friends went to the convent. The funeral bells were ringing, the church was open, and Constance's body lay there, wearing a white dress. At the church door, D'Artagnan's courage failed him, and he turned around to look for Athos, but Athos had disappeared. Athos had walked to the garden. He was following my lady's foot tracks. He discovered that she had left through a back door that led into the garden and had gotten in her carriage there. Athos went back to the inn and found Planchet there waiting for him. Planchet had followed the tracks of the carriage and seen the inn where the horses had stopped. He knew that my lady had gone to Armentières. There was only one inn in the town. It was called the Post. Planchet went to the inn and learned from the inn owner that a young woman had arrived the night before in a carriage. She was with a man on horseback, but he left her an hour later. The woman had rented a room, sent for the inn owner, and told him that she wanted to stay in the town for a long time. Planchet did not need any other information. He met with the other 3 servants, told them to watch all the doors of the inn, and came to find Athos. Athos thanked Planchet and called for his horse. He rode quickly to the city of Lille, approximately 15 miles away. He returned to Bethune that evening with a tall man. He left him waiting at an inn outside of the town, and then rode to meet his friends at their inn. By now it was late night. Athos bought a fresh horse from the inn owner, then called his friends together and told them that the time had come for their journey. Within a few minutes, all 3 were ready and waiting outside the inn. Athos came down last and saw that D'Artagnan was already on his horse.
"Wait,"
cried Athos.
"We must wait for one more man."
The 3 men looked at each other surprised, but Athos did not say anything. Planchet brought Athos his horse, and he jumped lightly up on its back.
"Wait here for me,"
he said.
"I will be back soon."
He returned 10 minutes later, riding next to a tall man wearing a large red cloak. Again, the musketeers looked at each other surprised. Athos still said nothing, however, and the musketeers, Planchet, and the man in the red cloak left on the road to Armentières. As they came close to Armentières, the sky became dark and it began to rain heavily. They covered their heads with their cloaks and rode on in the rain. As they entered the town, a man stepped out into the middle of the road. He raised an arm, telling the men to stop. Athos recognized his servant, Grimaud.
"Is something wrong?"
he asked.
"Has she left the town? Where is she?"
Grimaud pointed east towards the river Lys.
"She is in a small house in the forest. It is about half a mile from here, in the direction of the river,"
he said. Grimaud led the group into the forest. Many minutes passed. Grimaud again raised his arm, and the men saw a small and lonely house sitting near the river. Close to the house, on the river bank, sat a small boat. One window of the house had a light in it. Then a man climbed down from a tree, who had been hiding in the branches. It was Porthos' servant, Mousqueton.
"She is still in the house,"
he said.
"Bazin is watching the door." "Good,"
Athos whispered quietly.
"You have done well."
He jumped off his horse and gave it to Grimaud. He then walked quietly towards the window. He climbed the wall and stared in the window. He could see a woman sitting in a chair near a fire. From the window he could not see her face, but he knew it was certainly the woman he wanted to find. At this moment, one of the musketeers' horses made a sound. My lady turned her head and saw Athos' face in the window. She screamed and jumped up. Athos kicked the window open with his knee. The glass broke, and Athos, full of thoughts of revenge, jumped into the room. My lady ran to the door and threw it open. D'Artagnan stood outside the door, wet from the rain and pale in his face. He held a pistol in his hand and looked like the spirit of death. My lady fell back with a scream of fear.
"Put down your pistol, D'Artagnan,"
yelled Athos.
"We must take this woman to a court, not kill her. Come in, gentlemen."
My lady looked up at the men, white and afraid. "What do you want?" she suddenly screamed. Athos stared down at the woman on the floor.
"We plan to judge you according to your crimes."
Chapter 18. The Trial.
"You may speak to defend yourself,"
said Athos.
"Mr. D'Artagnan, you may speak to her first."
D'Artagnan stepped closer to my lady.
"I have little to say,"
he began.
"I believe this woman fed poison to Constance Bonacieux, who died yesterday."
Athos turned to Porthos and Aramis.
"We also believe this,"
they said together.
"Now it is my turn,"
said Athos, who suddenly became strangely pale.
"Gentlemen, I know this woman well. She is my wife."
His three friends could hardly believe him and stared at him in shock. My lady covered her face with her hands.
"I must tell you my secret. My true name is not Athos. Mr. Treville is the only man in Paris who knows my real name,"
said Athos.
"Gentlemen, last night you heard Madame Bonacieux say my name. I am the Comte de la Fère. I married this woman here when she was only 16 years old, and she was as lovely as an angel. She lived with her brother, who was a religious man, in a town where I was the official. They had recently come to the town, and nobody knew where they came from. Still, she was so beautiful, and her brother was so good, that nobody asked them about their past. I fell in love with her when I first saw her, and married her even though my family did not want me to. In our first months together, I quickly discovered that her lovely face hid a terrible heart.
Athos stopped talking for a moment, and a strange smile appeared on his lips.
One day,
he continued,
I saw her changing clothes in the light. She had never let me see her body in the light before, and I learned why. On her shoulder she had a tattoo. It was the mark of death, saying that she was going to be executed. She told me that she had been a thief, and she admitted that she had stolen the money from a church.
He paused again, but the others were too shocked to speak.
I was a high official, and in my land I had the power of life and death. So I tied her hands and legs and hung her on a tree, and left her there to die. As you can see, my friends, she did not die then, although I believe that she did. Are you sure that this is the same woman?
Asked Porthos, staring at my lady in shock.
You can see yourself,
said Athos, and he pulled the shirt off her beautiful shoulders. On one of her lovely shoulders was the mark of death.
My God,
Porthos said, then became quiet again. My lady made a cry of anger and pulled her shoulders back into her shirt. She stared at Athos with eyes full of hate. I dare you to find the man who gave me the mark, she screamed. Only he has the right of the law.
Quiet,
said a deep voice.
I will answer to that.
The tall man in the red cloak took a step forward and then lifted a hand and took off his cloak. My lady looked up at his face, and her eyes filled with fear. Oh, no, 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 she screamed. You are... She could hardly speak from fear. You are the executioner of Lille. Chapter 19. The Execution. The Musketeers all stepped back, and the man wearing the red cloak stood alone in the center of the room. Please forgive me, cried my lady, falling down on her knees. The man said nothing and waited for silence.
That woman,
he began,
was once a lovely young girl. She was as beautiful as she is now. She joined a convent and became a nun. The head of the convent was a young man, and he fell in love with her. Eventually, she persuaded him to marry her and to travel far away together. But they needed money to escape to another part of France. She stole many things from the church, and the man sold them. But then, just before they left, they were arrested. They were taken to prison, and within a week the prison official's son had fallen in love with her. She was punished with 10 years in prison, but he helped her to escape. The head of the convent was also punished with 10 years and to be marked. At that time, I was the executioner of the city of Lille, as this woman has already said. It was my job to mark the man, and I did, and that man was my only brother. I promised myself that the woman should at least share his punishment because she had stolen and destroyed him. I learned where she was hidden, so I went to find her. I caught her and placed the same mark on her shoulder that I had to give to my brother. When I returned to Lille, I learned that my brother had just escaped from prison. The people of the town thought I had helped him escape, and they put me in prison until he was caught. My brother, of course, did not know this. He had followed this woman. They went together to the town of Berry, and he found a job. They told everyone that this woman was his sister. A short time later, the official of that area fell in love with her and asked to marry her. She left my brother to marry the official and became the Countess de la Fère. My brother's heart was broken, and he could not live in the same area as her. He decided to come back to Lille. When he learned that I was put in prison for him, he came and took my place willingly. I was set free, and my brother was put in prison. A few nights later he killed himself. That is the story of this woman's crime, and why she was given the mark of death. Mr. D'Artagnan,
Athos said seriously,
what punishment do you think should be given to this woman? The punishment of execution,
answered D'Artagnan.
Mr. Aramis and Mr. Porthos,
Athos continued,
you are judges here. What punishment do you believe is fair? The punishment of execution,
answered the Musketeers. My lady screamed and moved forward on her knees towards her judges. She tried to speak, but no sound came out of her mouth. The executioner grasped her arm and pulled her out of the house. The executioner brought her to the boat on the river. He then tied her hands together. She turned to the men and cried out, "You all are murderers! 9 men to kill 1 woman!"
A woman? You are not a woman,
Athos said coldly.
You are a terrible devil escaped from hell, and we are now sending you back.
You do not have the power of life and death. You are not judges, screamed my lady. You cannot kill me.
You are not a judge, and you killed Constance Bonacieux,
said D'Artagnan. My lady yelled in fear and fell down on her knees. The executioner began to prepare the boat. "Oh, God!" she screamed. "Are you going to throw me in the river?"
Executioner, do your job,
said Athos.
Yes, sir, willingly,
answered the executioner.
For I believe that, in the eyes of God, I am doing right.
The boat began to move slowly across the river. The musketeers watched the boat cross to the other side. The sky was red, and the executioner and my lady looked like black shadows. In this time, my lady was able to untie the rope around her hands and feet. When they reached the other side, she jumped away from the boat and began to run. The rain had made the ground wet, and she fell down in the mud. The musketeers on the other side of the river saw the executioner slowly raise his arms. His sword was bright with moonlight. His 2 arms came down with great speed and power, and my lady gave out one last little cry. Chapter 20. The Cardinal's Messenger. When D'Artagnan returned to Paris, he rented some rooms near the house of Athos. One evening, while he sat thinking over a bottle of wine in his bedroom, there was a loud knock at the door. Before D'Artagnan could stand up, the door was pushed open. The man at the door looked around the room and quickly saw D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan stood up and turned to the door. When he saw who it was at the door, he gave out a cry of excitement. It was the dark stranger of Meung. D'Artagnan jumped forward and pulled out his sword.
At last,
he yelled with a smile.
This time you will not escape from me. I did not come to fight, mister,
the stranger replied.
I have come in the name of the king to arrest you. What?
D'Artagnan exclaimed.
Who are you? I am the Comte de Rochefort, and I have been ordered to take you to the Cardinal.
D'Artagnan stood in his place for a moment and then put away his sword. He smiled and said lightly,
You may take me to the Cardinal, but I will still fight you one day.
The 2 men got into a carriage and rode to the Cardinal's palace, where D'Artagnan followed Rochefort up to the Cardinal's library. The Cardinal was sitting at his desk writing. He looked up and told Rochefort to leave, then stared at D'Artagnan for a long time.
Mister,
he said,
I have written the order for your arrest. Do you know why? No, sir. The only thing I have done that I could be arrested for, you still do not know.
Richelieu again stared at the young man.
Mr. D'Artagnan,
he began,
you came to Paris about 8 months ago to become a musketeer and find your fortune in the world. On the way here, you rode through the town of Meung, where you met Rochefort and started a fight. I don't know what else happened there, but it was something. Mister,
said d'Artagnan.
That man stole my— I don't care.
The cardinal interrupted.
In Mung, you lost a letter you were carrying. It was a recommendation to Mr. Treville. In your time in Paris, you have done many things. You rode on horse, for example, with your musketeer friends towards the coast. But they were all stopped on the road, while you continued on your journey. Yes, you have done many things in these last few months. And now, Mr. d'Artagnan, you are arrested for having given secrets of France to England, to the Duke of Buckingham, for instance. And who can prove what you say, sir?
D'Artagnan asked calmly.
The only person who might know of my actions has herself been punished.
The cardinal looked surprised.
Whom do you mean? Milady, the Countess de la Fère.
The cardinal jumped to his feet when he heard the name.
Tell me, young man, who has punished her?
He asked angrily.
We have, sir, my friends and myself. Did you put her in prison then? She is dead. Dead?
Screamed the cardinal, as if he could not believe it.
Are you saying that you killed her? She murdered the young woman I loved. We took her, judged her crimes, and killed her.
D'Artagnan then told the cardinal of how Milady had poisoned Constance Bonacieux, of the trial and the execution.
So,
began the cardinal,
you acted as judges? You forget that those who kill without being a real judge are murderers. We are not, sir,
replied d'Artagnan quietly.
Since I have a letter of permission in my pocket. Permission? Signed by whom? By the king?
Great anger came across the cardinal's face.
No,
replied d'Artagnan.
Signed by you. Me? Young man, you are crazy. Sir, you will certainly recognize your own writing.
D'Artagnan then took a letter from his pocket paper, which the cardinal read aloud.
October 13th, 1626. It is by my permission and for the good of France that the man holding this letter has killed who he has killed. Richelieu.
The cardinal sat thinking for a long time. He read the paper again and again. Then he slowly tore it in small pieces.
Now I am in great trouble,
thought d'Artagnan. The cardinal picked up a pen, wrote a few lines on a piece of paper, and signed his name on it.
I will certainly go to prison, at least,
thought d'Artagnan sadly.
Take this,
the cardinal said suddenly, handing d'Artagnan the piece of paper.
I have taken your paper and changed it with this one. The name on the letter is still missing. I will let you write it in.
D'Artagnan read the piece of paper and could not believe what he saw. The letter was a promotion to become a captain in the Musketeers. He dropped down onto one knee.
Sir,
he began,
I should not receive this letter. I have 3 friends. They are also musketeers, and they are better than I. You are a man of great courage, Mr. d'Artagnan,
the cardinal said, smiling at how quickly he had changed his enemy into a friend.
I admire strong and brave men. You may do anything you wish with this letter of promotion. Just remember that I have given this letter to you to make the choice. I will never forget your kindness,
replied d'Artagnan. The cardinal turned to the door and called,
Rochefort.
Rochefort entered immediately.
Rochefort,
the cardinal began,
Mr. d'Artagnan is now my good friend. Do not fight with one another. Shake hands and become friends if you value living.
The 2 men shook hands, greeted each other politely, and smiled to the cardinal. They then left the room together.
We will have the opportunity to meet again, shall we not, Mr. d'Artagnan?
Said Rochefort as soon as the door was closed.
Soon,
answered d'Artagnan.
I will be ready,
said Rochefort.
Did I hear you 2 talking?
Said the cardinal, opening the door. Again the two men shook hands, smiled at each other, and bowed to the cardinal. D'Artagnan ran quickly to Athos' rooms. He told Athos everything that had happened when he saw the cardinal. After finishing his story, he held out the promotion letter and said,
"This, of course, should be yours."
Athos smiled at D'Artagnan and shook his head.
"No, my friend,"
he said.
"This job is too much for Athos and too little for the Comte de la Fère. You should keep it. It has cost you enough."
D'Artagnan bowed and left Athos. Next he went to see Porthos. Porthos greeted him dressed in a wonderful and fancy suit of clothes, looking happily at himself in a mirror.
"Well,"
Porthos asked,
"do you like my new clothes?" "They are very wonderful,"
D'Artagnan replied.
"But I have come here to offer you a suit of clothes that will look even better on you. The clothes of a captain of the Musketeers."
D'Artagnan then showed Porthos the promotion letter.
"My dear friend,"
said Porthos,
"this letter is of no use to me. While we are away in Bethune, a beautiful and rich lady who I know has lost her husband. In a year, when enough time has passed, I will be married to her. You should write your own name on the letter, for I am finished with fighting."
D'Artagnan then went to see Aramis. He found him sitting alone and praying. D'Artagnan told his story once again and offered the promotion to Aramis. Aramis shook his head.
"D'Artagnan,"
he said,
"our recent adventures have changed me. I have become unhappy with the life of the fighter. I have decided to become a religious man and work for the church. You keep this letter. You will make a brave captain."
D'Artagnan again went to see Athos, whom he found sitting quietly and staring into a glass of wine.
"I see,"
said Athos, with a smile,
"that Porthos and Aramis have also refused your letter."
He reached for a pen and wrote D'Artagnan's name on the paper and returned it to him.
"I will now become a captain,"
D'Artagnan said with a sad voice.
"but it seems that I will not often see my good friends any more. I will be left with only bad memories. You are still young,"
replied Athos,
"and all your bad memories will be changed into sweet ones one day."
Epilogue. D'Artagnan became a captain of the Musketeers. Porthos married the rich woman and lived richly and happily. Aramis left Paris and became a monk in the countryside. Athos remained a musketeer for a few more years, when he retired and moved to a small house in the country. D'Artagnan fought Rochefort 3 times and wounded him 3 times.
"The next time I shall probably kill you,"
he said, as he helped Rochefort stand up.
"Then it is better for me that we stop fighting,"
replied Rochefort.
"and let us become friends instead."